Hi, boys. Welcome to Daddy Cast History, Usborne Book of World History. Looks like we're learning about Egypt today. The Egyptians, 1500 BC to 500 BC, the New Kingdom. The period archaeologists call the New Kingdom of Egypt began about 1567 BC. Egypt was already an old civilization with great achievements, but now a great new age began. Great warriors like Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, Seti I, and Ramses II won a great empire. It was a time of great wealth, mighty temple buildings, and religious conflicts. Only one king's tomb escaped being robbed in ancient times, that of Tutankhamun. His treasures give us an idea of the fabulous riches that must once have been in Egypt. Queen Hatshepsut, who was one of the few women pharaohs of Egypt, inspects her new temple building at Deir el-Bahari. With her is her architect Senenmut. The temple still stands today, though much of the paint has worn off. Here's Hatshepsut, the pharaoh, and here is Senenmut, the architect. This part of Abu Simbel, a mighty rock-cut temple in Nubia, which was built by Ramses II. See, they have artists preparing the sculptures and that kind of thing. The Egyptian Empire. By 1500 BC, many countries in the Middle East already had long, interesting histories. Then there was a great new burst of activity. Countries began to increase trade, win empires, and set up colonies. The Egyptians had lived peacefully since about 3120 BC. The only province they had conquered in this time was Nubia, their neighbor in the south. Between 1670 and 1567 BC, a people called the Hyksos crossed the eastern frontier and conquered Egypt. Egyptians built huge forts like this one on their frontiers, but the Hyksos had horses and chariots, and they galloped past before the Egyptians could stop them. The Hyksos ruled parts of Egypt for about 100 years before the Egyptians began to attack them. Most Egyptian soldiers still fought on foot with spears or bows and arrows, and no body armor. The Pharaoh's Court. The pharaoh and his queen received ambassadors from lands belonging to their empire. These brought riches as gifts and tribute, and also goods to trade. Here, Syrians and Nubians paid tribute to the pharaoh. The Egyptians had their own gold mines and could use the gold to buy things they lacked, such as good timber. They also imported silver, copper, horses, slaves, ivory, and exotic African animals and skins. Here is the pharaoh and his queen. Here is gold. Lady courtiers. Nubians. A pet baboon for the queen. On this side are Syrians. Here's a slave girl. See the chain holding her. All right, reading about the Hyksos again. The Egyptians had to learn to use horses and chariots to force the Hyksos out of Egypt. Then, led by warrior pharaohs or kings, they began to attack neighboring lands. Reports of the battles were written on temple walls to honor the pharaohs. Within 70 years, the Egyptians gained control of the largest empire of their time. This map shows the Egyptian Empire in 1450 BC. The Mitanni and the Hittites in the north were powerful rivals of the Egyptians. So here's Egypt, and the Egyptian Empire included this area and Sinai and up through Syria. The Mitanni were up here, the Hittites were up here. Trade with other lands. The Cretans and later the Mycenaeans traded with the Egyptians. They brought to Egypt the products of Crete, Greece, and the Mediterranean islands. The Egyptians visited a land they called Punt, which historians think may have been in East Africa. They bought incense there. For centuries, Sinai was the source of Egypt's turquoise and copper. Donkey caravans regularly visited the mining camps to take supplies and bring the turquoise back. Travel in ancient Egypt. Here's a small boat for ferrying people across a river. Cargo boat taking goods to different parts of Egypt. The easiest way to travel in Egypt was by river. Land travel was difficult because of the number of irrigation canals. Here are some of the boats which could be seen on the Nile about 3,000 years ago. Boats traveling south used a sail to help against the flow of the current. So if they started up at the Nile Delta and they wanted to go south, since the river is flowing this way, they would need to use the wind to help them go upstream. Pharaoh's special war crown. Houses and furniture. It says this is a city street in ancient Egypt. Models show that in cities where land was scarce, the Egyptians built houses up to 5 stories high. Houses and furniture. In Egypt, only temples and tombs, which were built to stand forever, were made of stone. All other buildings were made of sun-dried brick. Rich people had their houses plastered and painted. Very few Egyptian cities can be excavated because modern cities are built on top of the old ones. However, models and paintings from tombs show us what ancient Egyptian houses looked like in both town and country. Here's a bedroom. On the bed, instead of a pillow, they had a headrest. The Egyptians used stone or wooden headrests on their beds instead of pillows. They kept their clothes in chests and their jewelry and cosmetics in small boxes. Here's the bathroom. Taking a shower. Rich people had bathrooms and lavatories. Here's a lavatory. In their houses, the bathroom walls were lined with stone to stop the splashes from damaging the mud bricks. Maybe a slave would pour the water on them. This would be like probably you poop in a pan and the slave takes the poop away or whatever. Making bricks. Let's see. People spent a lot of time on the roofs of their houses because it was cooler there and they could enjoy the evening breeze. Sometimes they slept on the roof too. Making bricks. The hard, dry earth was broken up with digging sticks and piled into baskets. Water and chopped straw were trodden into the mud, and then the mixture was put into molds. The bricks were left to dry in the hot sun. It took several days for them to dry hard. Furniture. The Egyptians buried furniture with the dead for use in the next world, so archaeologists have been able to find many pieces of actual furniture. The greatest find of all was from the tomb of Tutankhamun. The rich inlaid furniture shown here is of the type owned by noblemen. Some items are based on Tutankhamun's. Here's a game board. This is a chair. That's where you would sit. A linen chest for putting in clothes. Putting your clothes in it. A folding stool with a leather seat. An Egyptian wine jar. A wine jar imported from Canaan. And an oil lamp made of alabaster. The oil was put in here and lit. Country houses. This house belongs to a wealthy farmer and his family. They did their cooking outside to avoid the risk of fire and to get rid of smells. Here's a donkey used for carrying things to and from the fields. A vegetable plot. Silos for storing grain. A woman grinding flour. This is straw. A loom for weaving cloth. And a shade at the top to keep the sun off. Temples. Here's the temple. Here's a shrine. Here's a god or an idol. A statue of a god or goddess was kept in a special shrine in every Egyptian temple. Each day, priests bathed, clothed, and fed the statue, and then prayed to it. The main part of the temple was this huge columned hall. Its walls and pillars were covered with religious pictures and texts. Ordinary people were not allowed in here or in the inner sanctuary where the shrine was kept. They had to stay outside in the temple courtyard. On festival days, they could see the shrine containing the god. The priests lifted it onto a model boat. This is a picture of a model boat, but it's sort of chopped off, which you can see here. Then they carried around the city, accompanied by temple dancers and musicians. Here are some of the Egyptians' gods and goddesses. They were often painted or carved in the shape of animals, or at least with animals' heads. This was so they could be easily recognized, even by people who could not read. Amun-Re was the chief of the gods. Osiris, Horus, Thoth, Anubis, Hathor, Taweret, Ptah, Sekhmet, Apis, Amun-Re, and Isis. Temple craftsmen. Egyptian temples owned large estates and were very rich. Many carpenters, leather workers, potters, and other craftsmen were employed in the temple workshops. Here are papyrus reeds being gathered. The reed was cut into strips. The outside was cut off. Maybe the outside was cut off and then the reed was cut into strips. The strips were soaked and the strips were pounded. The Egyptians wrote on papyrus, which was made from papyrus reeds. These were cut into strips, soaked, and then laid in 2 layers. Pounding with a mallet changed the layers into a solid sheet. So that was what they would write on. Armies of scribes worked in the temples. Many of them spent their time copying out texts on rolls of papyrus. They wrote in picture signs, which we call hieroglyphs. The scribes wrote on papyrus with brushes. Their ink was made in solid blocks and had to be used with water. Brushes and ink were kept in palettes like these. There's the block of ink, the color block, and here these sticks are the brushes. Maybe they would have water in there to help. I don't know. How we know. Only a few papyrus rolls have survived, and these are badly damaged. However, scholars are able to learn a great deal from them about life in ancient Egypt. Mathematics. The Egyptians were excellent mathematicians. Some of their texts show how they planned buildings and calculated the men and materials needed to build them. Medicine. Surviving medical texts show the Egyptians were skilled doctors. These texts give details of treatments, medicines, prayers, and spells. Telling the time. Position of water level shows what time it is. Water drips out here. This water clock was an Egyptian invention for telling the time. The Egyptians also worked out the 365-day calendar by studying the stars and planets. Here's how you can make your own water clock. You have 2 yogurt pots, one upside down and one on top, inside of a bowl. Mark the level with the wax crayon each minute as the water drips out from the top yogurt pot. Fill up the top pot with water and mark the level with a wax crayon. Using a clock or watch, mark the water level each minute. And then fill up the pot to use the clock. That's their idea of how you can make your own water clock. All right, guys, that is the end of this DaddyCast. I'll see you later.